Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmadu nusalli ala Rasul al-Kareem. Very good morning and Assalamu alaikum. The 9,963rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this morning is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. I would like to warmly welcome the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. Before each of you is a list of speakers who have requested to participate in accordance with Rules 37 and 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, as well as the previous practice of the Council in this regard. We propose that they be invited to participate in this meeting. There being no objection, it is decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Is Mr. Khairi here? Yes. Okay. I now give the floor to Mr. Khalid Khairi for briefing the Council.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, I brief you today as intensive talks continue over a potential Gaza ceasefire agreement and release of hostages. It is crucial that this leads to a permanent end to the war and the release of all hostages. It is long past time for the fighting to end, for hostages to return home, for adequate humanitarian aid to enter the Strip, and for recovery and reconstruction to begin in the context of a return to a political path towards a two-state solution. While talks are ongoing, the horrific situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate, with Israeli military operations and hostilities expanding throughout the Strip and the human toll mounting by the hour. This nightmare of historic proportions must end immediately. The intensive Israeli military operation in Deir al-Balah that has resulted in still further Palestinian displacement and direct strikes on 2 UN guest houses has further exacerbated the dire situation and impeded humanitarian operations. At least 1,891 Palestinians were killed in Gaza since my last briefing on 30 June, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. Some 294 were reportedly killed while attempting to collect aid, including in the vicinity of militarized aid distribution sites. Israeli forces continued to issue evacuation orders, causing the repeated displacement of the population. food insecurity, and the broader humanitarian situation continue to worsen despite the limited increase in the approval of entry of humanitarian supplies. According to Israeli sources, 50 hostages, including one woman, are still being held captive by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups in Gaza, including 28 that are believed to be dead. Since 30 June, 13 IDF soldiers were killed in hostilities in Gaza. Palestinian militants also continue to sporadically and indiscriminately launch rockets towards Israel. The Secretary General has repeatedly condemned the continued holding of hostages by Hamas and other armed groups. Hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. I echo the Secretary General's calls for the repeated displacement of the population in Gaza to cease. Any forced displacement of the population from any part of the occupied Palestinian territory will constitute a breach of international law obligations. International humanitarian law must be respected by all parties at all times, and civilians must be protected. On 17th of July, the Catholic Church of the Holy Family in Gaza City was hit by an Israeli strike, which killed 3 and injured several others. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem condemned what it said was a targeted strike on the church and said the extensive damage has forced the evacuation of some 600 Palestinians seeking shelter in the compound, including children and those with special needs. The Secretary General condemned the strike, stressing that attacks on places of worship are unacceptable. The incident also prompted widespread condemnation and calls for accountability from member states. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said that Israel deeply regrets that a stray ammunition hit the church and noted that Israel is investigating the incident. On 10th of July, EU High Representative Kallas announced that the EU and Israel has agreed on significant steps to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Since then, Kallas has reiterated the need for implementing the agreement and that far more assistance is needed. Since 9th of July, following 130 days of a full blockade on fuel, Israel authorities allow the entry of a small number of fuel trucks through the Kerem Shalom Karim Abu Salem crossing for medical facilities and other essential services. This amount is a fraction of what is required to run essential life-saving services in Gaza, where nearly every aspect of life depends on fuel. Mr. President, the situation in the occupied West Bank also remains deeply concerning, with high levels of violence driven by ongoing Israeli military operations, many involving civilian casualties and extensive damages to homes and infrastructure, attacks by settlers against Palestinians, and attacks by Palestinians against Israelis. On 1st of July, Israeli security forces shot and killed a 17-year-old Palestinian boy during an operation in Ramallah. He was reportedly shot from inside an armored vehicle while walking with a relative. On 10th of July, 2 Palestinians shot and killed an Israeli man in the Gush Etzion settlement. The Palestinian perpetrators were reportedly shot and killed by Israeli civilians at the scene. On 11th of July, Israeli settlers attacked and killed 2 Palestinians, one of them a visiting American citizen, near the village of Sinjil. One of them reportedly bled to death after being shot, and the other was beaten with bats and sticks. On 17th of July, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Huckabee condemned the attack as a terrorist act and said Israel must ensure accountability. Settlement advancement also continues, as numerous ministers and members of the Knesset intensify their calls on the government to formally annex the West Bank or parts of it. Further exacerbating the situation, the Palestinian Authority continues to face a dire fiscal crisis. The continued withholding of clearance revenues by Israel, amounting to $2.7 billion, has severely impacted the Palestinian Authority ability to meet its core obligation and sustain essential public services. Since May, the Palestinian Authority has been unable to pay civil servant salaries, including those of the security forces, or provide social support. In an emergency session held on 17th of July, the Palestinian cabinet issued a stark warning that the Palestinian Authority may be forced to temporarily shut down vital sectors. Beyond the immediate risk to healthcare and basic service delivery, the Palestinian Authority also cautioned that similar disruptions across other institutions could erode social cohesion and undermine overall stability. Unless urgently addressed, deterioration of the Palestinian Authority's fiscal and institutional situation could have catastrophic consequences, undermining the significant progress made over many years to build up Palestinian institutions. It is essential that the international community provide immediate support to address the Palestinian Authority's fiscal challenges, strengthening its governance capacity, and prepare it to reassume its responsibilities in Gaza. Mr. President, in the midst of these multiple crises, UNRWA continues to face immense operational, political, and financial pressures. UNRWA's operations have been impeded in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. 330 agency staff have been killed in the war in Gaza. I reiterate the Secretary General's message that UNRWA cannot be replaced, and I cannot overstate enough how serious the agency's financial crisis is. Based on current forecasts, there is not enough money to sustain all operations in all fields beyond August 2025. Mr. President, we remain concerned by the precarious situation in the region, marked by sporadic developments and recurrent volatility. The situation along the Blue Line remains stable but fragile. The Israel Defense Forces maintain a presence north of the Blue Line, while unauthorized weapons belonging to non-state actors are still being uncovered in southern Lebanon by the Lebanese armed forces and UNIFIL. In this context, the Lebanese authorities have reiterated their commitment to bringing all arms under the exclusive control of the state. I urge both Lebanon and Israel to honor their obligations under the cessation of hostilities and to take concrete steps toward the full implementation of Resolution 1701, restoring and sustaining stability in the area. Syria is contending with another episode of violence that puts at risk its path to a peaceful, credible, orderly, and inclusive political transition. Fighting in Suwaida has resulted in hundreds of casualties, including Druze and Bedouin civilians. I reiterate the Secretary General's unequivocal condemnation of all violence against civilians, including all acts that fan the flames of sectarian tensions and rob the people of Syria of their opportunity for peace and reconciliation after 14 years of brutal conflict. Against this backdrop, citing the violations against the Druze community and pledging to protect them, between 12 and 16 July, Israel resumed and intensified its airstrikes on Syrian territory. It is essential that both Israel and Syria uphold the terms of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement to preserve the ceasefire between both parties and refrain from any action that would further undermine it and the stability of the Golan region. Mr. President, repeated and increasingly desperate appeals for an urgent ceasefire in Gaza have been made in this Council. Today, the situation inside the Strip, especially for women and children, is more dire than at any time in this crisis. I implore the parties, first and foremost, to end this war, release all hostages, and allow the Palestinian population in Gaza to receive the humanitarian assistance they so desperately need. I urge all member states, including those in the Council, to take all possible steps to bring about this end. Urgent steps are needed to reverse the deeply concerning trajectory we see across the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Addressing the high levels of violence, including stopping the escalating settler attacks in the occupied West Bank alongside fiscal relief for the Palestinian Authority, are key priorities. There will be no lasting solution to this crisis without a political horizon to resolve the conflicts and an end to the occupation. The upcoming ministerial meeting to support the two-state solution, co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia, is key to highlight international consensus around these goals and reaffirm the principles sustaining the two-state solutions. It is also a crucial moment to express support for the Palestinian Authority, identify ways to strengthening and encourage further reforms in line with these commitments, and to demonstrate through tangible steps our unwavering commitment to the two-state solution. Our goal is clear: realizing the vision of two states, Israel and a viable and sovereign Palestinian state, of which Gaza is an integral part, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid Khairi, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations. I would now give the floor to the Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, we thank Pakistan for elevating this open debate to a ministerial level, and in this connection, we welcome Your Excellency presiding over this very important meeting. I also would like to thank ASG, Mr. Khalid Khairi, for his briefing. Mr. President, 4-year-old Razan fought for as long as she could, but her body gave up and she died of malnutrition on Sunday. Yesterday, 6-year-old Yusuf died of starvation. He was among 15 people to starve to death in the last 24 hours in Gaza. Israel has ravaged Gaza. It has destroyed nearly everything in that narrow strip of Palestinian land. But nearly 2 million human beings remain, including 1 million children. They must be saved. Israel has destroyed everything: their lives, their homes, the mosques and the churches, the schools and the hospitals, the entire infrastructure of life, and even the cemeteries. But make no mistake, the real target is the 2 million Palestinians who remain in Gaza. For Israel, their destruction is required for its scheme to take over the land. The fact Netanyahu and his government are actively pursuing transforming Gaza into a land without a people through genocide and ethnic cleansing under the unconvincing disguise of voluntary migration has only been made possible by the impunity they enjoy. All of what is happening now was predictable, premeditated and planned. It is a criminal and cruel enterprise occurring openly for all to see. Do you know when was the first plan for so-called voluntary migration presented to the Israeli cabinet? 13th October 2023. Go back to what we said in this very chamber 20 months ago. We said this would be happening. It took tens of thousands of Palestinians killed for the world to acknowledge it. How many more need to die before getting the world to act to stop this genocide? Mr. President, in Gaza, starved journalists are reporting about starved health and humanitarian personnel trying to save the lives of starving infants and children and their starving families. People are dying of hunger and thirst by design or while desperately trying to get food or water by design. People are collapsing in the streets while being forcibly displaced yet again by design. People are being gunned down and murdered by Israeli soldiers for merely trying to get a bag of flour or lentils to feed their families, again by design. Every day now, we receive heart-wrenching messages from Gaza with few words. I am hungry. This is what our children are saying, and every individual in Gaza is saying, I am hungry. There is no food for my family. We are dying. Help us. What should we tell them? What should the Security Council tell them? That the whole world is against this starvation policy, and yet it is worsening. That no one wants to see people in Gaza starving, and yet the world watches on as they die of hunger and thirst. Should we read to them the strong statements issued or the resolutions adopted? What should we tell them? They hear of outrage, condemnation, pressure, and deals being made, but find no food to save their lives and the lives of their loved ones, or get shot to death while trying to reach it. They bury their sons and daughters every day. They grow thinner as their bodies eat away at them every day, wasting away, their struggle to survive more painful and more crushing every day. What should we tell them? That the negotiations for a ceasefire continue, and that in the meantime Israel has been given a right to massacre them and to deny them aid to life? Is that what international law stipulates? Is that what humanity dictates? What should we tell them? That this is the extent of what the world can do or is willing to do to save Palestinian lives? That the fact the perpetrators of these horrors are Israelis means they cannot be held to account? That there is aid at the borders and brave UN and humanitarian personnel ready to distribute this aid as they had done before, but we cannot get Israel to open the crossings and allow the aid to be distributed without killing those distributing it or those receiving it. What is our collective plan to actually save lives? What is being done now that could actually stop this horror? That is the only measure that matters. Are we doing what is necessary to save the millions of lives at risk? Are we upholding our legal, political, humanitarian, moral, and human obligations? And the answer is absolutely clear: we are not. So which one is it? Are Palestinian lives not worth saving? Or does Israeli supremacy extend as far as conferring upon Israel a right of life and death over the Palestinian people as a whole? Mr. President, it is now for every state to determine where it stands at this historical juncture. Every single country will be asked, what did you do during this genocide? Not what you said or what you considered doing, but what did you actually do? What did you do to stop it and stop the destruction of human life? There is no time to waste and no place for self-inflicted powerlessness. Countries have tools they need to use, nationally and collectively, to bring the genocide to an end. Ask yourselves, did we do everything possible? And I assure you, it is impossible to say yes. We call for a coalition of the willing to take every action necessary now to end the genocide, to uphold international law and save what is left of our humanity under the rubble in Gaza, and end the occupation and conflict. A year ago, the ICJ adopted a landmark opinion on ending the unlawful presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory that spelled out in no uncertain terms the obligations of Israel and, as importantly, the obligations of third parties. You. Any state claiming to be a law-abiding state must take action to comply with this opinion and ensure it moves away from complicity and contributes to accountability. The General Assembly called over a month ago upon all member states to individually and collectively advance accountability and take all measures necessary in line with international law and the Charter of the United Nations to ensure compliance by Israel, the occupying power, with its obligations. Since the adoption of that resolution, more than 3,000 Palestinians were killed, the majority women and children. States must act now to stop these atrocities. I represented the state of Palestine at the meeting of the Hague Group in Bogota, Colombia, where countries came together and adopted concrete measures to halt the genocide and advance accountability. This is an important step in the right direction. Several of the countries represented here have also announced concrete steps and initiatives to the same effect. But much more needs to be done, and fast. The commitment is good by some, but it's not sufficient. We need more from all of you. Within days, not weeks, and certainly not months, we are out of time because every day we fail to act, children are killed, starved, orphaned, burned, disabled, and traumatized. Families are shattered, life is destroyed. Red lines are useless if they can be crossed over and over again without consequences. Rules are worthless if we are not willing to sanction their breacher. Words are meaningless if they are not followed by action. We need you to act, and act now. Of course, it is better to speak out rather than stay silent, but speaking out cannot be an alternative to action, especially when it is evident Israel is not listening and becoming only more brutal, only more dangerous. And we should not pretend we are not hearing what Israel is saying or not seeing what it is doing. Netanyahu, Katz, Saar, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir are clear. They say there are no innocent people in Gaza. They call our children children of darkness. They call our people human animals and have been acting accordingly. They spoke of inflicting death and destruction on all of Gaza, and they did. They are confessing to their own crimes and are committing them in plain sight for all to see. 7 decades of impunity make them confident they have no reason to hide their intentions or actions. Mr. President, we warn against all those who try to portray this conflict as a religious conflict, including those who do so to shield Israel from criticism and condemnation. This is not a conflict between Jews and Muslims. It is a war against Palestinian presence in the land of Palestine. Palestinian Christians are not spared. From Gaza to Taibe, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. The Israeli strike against the Holy Family Church is not the first of its kind. By the way, this is the church that the late Pope Francis used to call every day. The historic Greek Orthodox Church of Saint Porphyrius in Gaza was bombed in the early days of the war, as was the great Omari Mosque. 2 Palestinian women were shot and killed on the grounds of the Holy Family Church back in December 2023. Settlers' terror attacks are about forcibly displacing Palestinian communities regardless of their faith and about stealing their land. Christians are harassed, attacked, and beaten like their Muslim brothers and sisters. When trying to celebrate their holy days, priests and nuns report attacks against them and the church properties. They are spat on, insulted, and threatened by Israeli extremists. This is not a conflict between Jews and Muslims. The diversity of our people reflects the diversity of this land and its rich history and its significance for all monotheistic religions. And the solidarity movement with Palestine is comprised of people of all nationalities and all faiths, coming together against injustice, against occupation and apartheid, against oppression and genocide. And it includes Israelis who care about justice, but also about Israel and its future. And they know that the path on which Israel has embarked, by which it thinks it can impose its will on the region through bullets and bombs and expects surrender than peace, is reckless and wrong and will lead to devastating effects for the region and the world. Mark my words, Israel's genocide in Gaza will redefine the region and our world for generations to come. And what we do next will determine in what way. Let me repeat that. Mark my words. Israel's genocide in Gaza will redefine the region and our world for generations to come. And what we do next will determine in what way. Mr. President, an alternative path is possible if we act now, where life is restored in Gaza, where freedom for the Palestinian people is achieved, where Palestinians and Israelis can live in shared space and security, and where the region as a whole can experience peace, stability, and prosperity. This path of just and lasting peace, upholding international law and based on the relevant UN resolutions and the fulfillment of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination and the realization of their right to their independent state, and the implementation of the two-state solution, with Palestine and Israel living side by side in peace and security. This is the only path forward. It requires the mobilization of all states to advance freedom and justice leading to peace and security. The international conference to be convened by Saudi Arabia and France at the end of this month offers a unique opportunity to transform international law and the international consensus into an achievable plan and to demonstrate resolve to end the occupation and conflict once and for all, for the benefit of all peoples and of all the states of the region. That is the path that must be taken with courage and commitment and without delay. Mr. President, it all starts with Gaza, with the children of Gaza. For now, history will remember us all for the lives we failed to save. But many more lives remain to be saved. Let us not fail them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine, for your statement. I will now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe this chamber and the UN would benefit from something basic, a full and honest overview of the current state of our region. Let's begin in Gaza, where Hamas continues with its deprived tactics. 50 innocent people remain held hostage. Israel has been working tirelessly to bring them home. We have made compromise after compromise, crossing lines no other nation would consider. But Hamas has rejected each and every offer. Even as we speak, we receive rejections from Hamas. For Hamas, the suffering of its own people is their greatest weapon. The longer the misery continues, the longer they can feed it into their propaganda machine. I am sure that all of you will address the humanitarian situation. But I will remind you, you all must focus your pressure where it belongs, on Hamas. They are the ones who are saying no to the offer. If you don't believe me, you can ask the US, Qatar, Egypt, the ones who are trying to negotiate. They are rejecting every offer. In Lebanon, the new government has made promising statements about reform, and we are listening. But Hezbollah is busy attempting to rearm and reassert itself in southern Lebanon and Beirut. We have seen this movie before. We know how it ends. Israel will never allow this to happen. We will not permit Hezbollah to rebuild its terror infrastructure on our northern border. In Iran, the genocidal regime that spent 12 days launching missiles at Israeli civilians is trying to restart its nuclear program. Since today we have the so-called privilege of the presence of Deputy Foreign Minister Rabadbi here today, so let me ask him directly, what is your plan now? Will you continue with your murderous agenda? Will you keep running toward a nuclear bomb? Will you keep expending your ballistic missiles for attacks on civilians? Will you keep pumping money into your terrorist boxes? You don't need to answer, because we already know it. Now is the time for action. Sanctions must not be lifted, they must be imposed now, on the regime's economy, on its terror network, on its ballistic missile program, and on the individual leaders who sit in Tehran and plot murder as their foreign policy. In Syria, jihadist forces have traveled south of Damascus to the Druze city of Suwaida, where they have committed unimaginable atrocities. Hundreds of innocent men, women, and children now lie dead. I have personally received hundreds of calls from my Druze friends from Israel, terrified and horrified by what is happening to their people. Their family ties cross the border. Their brothers and sisters live both in Suwaida and in Israel. For us, this is personal. It is Israel's sacred moral duty to stand by our Druze brothers and sisters in their time of need. We are guided by our unshakable moral compass. We will not stand idly by while innocent minorities are slaughtered, just kilometers away from their Israeli family members. So yes, the Middle East today is embroiled in chaos, but is also filled with opportunity. There is chaos for the innocent hostages still trapped in Hamas's tunnels. Chaos for the civilians and minorities in Lebanon and Syria still facing terror. Chaos for the entire region as Iran continues to push the world to the edge. But there is also opportunity, because the forces of darkness have been weakened. Hamas has lost much of its terror infrastructure and its senior leadership. Hezbollah was crippled by Israel's operations last year. Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs have been set back in ways that were once thought impossible. Israel is making the Middle East safer for everyone who values peace and calm. In other words, we are doing the work of the United Nations. While Israel dismantles terror networks and protects innocent lives, what does the UN do? It clings to its political agenda. It protects its bias. It defends the agencies that have long abandoned neutrality. You don't need to look far to see this bias in action. Just look at the statements and conduct of Tom Fletcher and his agency, OCHA. Too often, Mr. Fletcher has forgotten or decided to ignore that his statements have consequences. He has repeatedly abandoned his sacred responsibility to act without bias, choosing instead to fuel a political campaign against Israel. Several weeks ago, Mr. Fletcher claimed that 14,000 babies in Gaza would starve to death within 48 hours. That statement was false. It was baseless. While he quietly walked it back, the damage had already been done. But with another lie, Mr. Fletcher has not walked back: the accusation that Israel is committing genocide. He knows it's not true. He knows it. There are facts, international law, you have to prove intention. Yet he said it anyway. That word carries more weight than any other accusation. To use it falsely is to dishonor the memory of real genocide victims and to endanger more lives by fueling hatred. It is not too late to correct the record. Israel demands that Mr. Fletcher retract his statement, publicly, unequivocally, and immediately. But this is no longer just about one official's reckless remarks. His responsibility has infected OCHA from top to bottom. Let's start with the data. On May 6, OCHA published figures claiming to show civilian casualties in Gaza. Officially, just 2 days later, those figures were reduced by over 10,000. Not by 1, not by 10, not by 100, and not by 1,000, by 10,000. Just like that. No explanation, no accountability, just a quiet adjustment. No, 10,000 less. As if the original numbers weren't already plastered across headlines worldwide. OCHA has built its reports almost exclusively on data from Hamas-run institutions. There is no independent verification, no cross-checking, no effort to distinguish between civilians and terrorists. Every casualty is listed as a civilian. This violates the UN's own standards in every other conflict. But when it comes to Israel, those standards disappear. At the same time, OCHA has actively undermined Israel's humanitarian efforts in Gaza. It tracks only UN-coordinated aid while ignoring the thousands of trucks of food, medical supplies, and fuel that Israel, the private sector, and other partners have delivered. OCHA has undercounted over 13,000 trucks. That's a deliberate choice to misrepresent reality. Perhaps most disturbing, Israel has uncovered clear evidence of Hamas affiliation within OCHA's ranks. So when you combine all of that with Mr. Fletcher's repeated falsehoods, you are not looking at a humanitarian agency, you are looking at a propaganda machine. I have said many times before, Israel believes in humanitarian work. We are committed to helping civilians, to protecting innocents, and to ensuring aid reaches those who need it. But we will not work with organizations that have chosen politics over principles. Mr. Fletcher has made it clear that OCHA is no longer a neutral agency. Israel is therefore left with no choice but to act. Today, I announce that Israel will take steps to ensure that what has been happening with OCHA will no longer continue. Hundreds of OCHA employees are undergoing security vetting. Key employees will not have their permits renewed following clear evidence of strong affiliation with Hamas. Some were even involved in the atrocities of October 7. Israel will no longer grant automatic visas to OCHA's international staff. Visas will now be limited to 1 month's terms. What was will no longer be. Jonathan Whitehall, OCHA's head of office for the so-called territories, has consistently and outrageously demonstrated his bias and agenda against the state of Israel. He will not have his visa renewed, and he will leave the country by July 29th. Mr. President, at some point, enough is enough. Enough with the hypocrisy. Enough with the bias. Enough with the endless defamation campaign against the state of Israel. Israel is doing the job the UN was created to do. We are dismantling terror networks. We are protecting civilians. We are standing up for minorities under threat. While Israel fulfills this mission, many within the UN spend all of their energy, 24/7, trying to smear Israel, protecting its own biases, siding with the very actors that fuel the chaos. It is time to return to the UN's core purpose. Israel will continue to do what is necessary to protect our people, defend our borders, help our neighbors in need, and bring our hostages home. We invite the UN, finally, to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Israel, for your statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasul al-Kareem. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to preside over this important open debate on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. I thank Assistant Secretary General Khalid Khayari for his comprehensive briefing. For decades, the Palestinian people have endured the worst form of occupation and apartheid. They have been denied their fundamental and inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination and statehood. What we have witnessed in Gaza for the last 22 months is not just a humanitarian catastrophe, but a collapse of humanity itself. Gaza has become a graveyard for innocent lives as well as for the international law, particularly the international humanitarian law. Over 58,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, have been killed in Israel's brutal military assault. The systematic targeting of hospitals, schools, UN facilities, aid convoys, and refugee camps are not incidental. These are deliberate acts of collective punishment in flagrant violation of IHL, numerous Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, as well as the binding provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. Excellencies, the hunger crisis in Gaza has reached unprecedented and deeply alarming levels. According to the United Nations World Food Programme, a third of the population not eating for multiple days in a row, an indicator of catastrophic levels of food insecurity. Excellencies, the Palestinian question is a litmus test for the credibility of the United Nations, the Security Council, and the integrity of the international law. Failure to uphold the rights of the Palestinian people will embolden impunity and undermine the legitimacy of the very international order we all claim to defend and uphold. The Security Council must live up to its responsibility and ensure compliance with its own decisions. Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering and principled support and solidarity with the Palestinian people and their right to a viable, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. This is the only just and durable solution, enshrined in Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the consensus position of the OSCE. We urge the Security Council to pursue with unity and urgency the following concrete measures. First, an immediate, permanent, and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and across the occupied Palestinian territory, including the full implementation of the Council Resolution 2735. We appreciate the ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at securing a ceasefire in Gaza and hope these would yield tangible and meaningful outcomes, including a permanent end to the war. We appreciate the role played by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States in this regard. Second, unfettered, sustained, and secure humanitarian access to all civilians in need and the protection of aid workers, medical teams, and the UN personnel. Immediate steps should be taken to ensure the delivery of life-saving food and medical assistance, restore humanitarian supply lines, and prevent famine conditions from taking hold. Third, renewed and reinforced international support to UNRWA, which remains indispensable to the survival of millions of Palestinians. Fourth, an end to the forced displacement, illegal settlement expansion, and annexation of Palestinian land, particularly in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Fifth, implementation of the Arab and OIC-led reconstruction plan for Gaza, which represents a vital framework for post-conflict recovery and rehabilitation, sustainable development, and the restoration of dignity for the Palestinian people. And sixth and last, a political horizon is the need of the hour, the revival of a genuine and time-bound political process to achieve a just, comprehensive, and lasting two-state solution in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Pakistan welcomes the growing international momentum in support of the Palestinian statehood and full membership of the UN. We urge those that have yet to recognize the state of Palestine to do so as soon as they can. We also welcome the convening on 28th of July of the International Conference on the Two-State Solution, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, to help generate renewed momentum and take concrete actions towards achieving the two-state solution. Excellencies, a comprehensive and enduring peace in the Middle East requires addressing all interrelated crises across the region through effective multilateralism and peaceful settlement of disputes. Pakistan supports the stabilization of Syria through an inclusive political process. Syria's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity must be upheld. Israel must withdraw immediately from the separation zone established under the 1974 disengagement agreement and from the occupied Syrian Golan Heights in accordance with Security Council resolutions 242, 338, and 497. In Lebanon, the ceasefire understanding and resolution 1701 must be respected and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon safeguarded. We must support the peace process in Yemen, facilitated by the UN and regional actors, particularly Saudi Arabia and Oman. The sharp rise in tension and violence as a result of Israeli aggression and unlawful military strikes in Iran was profoundly disturbing. These attacks set a dangerous precedent and pose grave threat to regional and global peace. Pakistan calls for urgent recourse to dialogue and diplomacy consistent with the UN Charter to find a peaceful and lasting resolution to this issue in accordance with the rights, obligations, and responsibilities of all parties. Excellencies, history has taught us that the use of force and unilateral military actions only deepen conflicts and entrench divisions with tragic human and humanitarian consequences. The way forward lies in upholding international law, ending foreign occupation, rejecting the use of force, and promoting solutions through dialogue and diplomacy. It is time to give the Palestinian people what they have been denied for too long: justice, freedom, dignity, and a state of their own. That is the path to durable peace and stability in the Middle East. I thank you all. I now resume my functions as President of the Council, and I will give the floor to the representative of Greece.
I thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Khaled Chiari for his detailed and insightful briefing. Mr. President, a lot has transpired in the volatile region of the Middle East since our last open debate in April, demonstrating the potential pitfalls in a part of the world where security can unravel in an instant. The recent cessation of hostilities between Iran and Israel has been a welcome development. It is now critical for IAEA inspectors to resume their activity, verifying the status of Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles and enrichment capabilities. We urge Tehran to abide by the JCPOA, return to the negotiations table, and uphold its commitments as part of the NPT. Volatility in the Red Sea region, a nodal maritime route, exposes the international community to acute security risks and economic uncertainty, jeopardizing global trade and supply chains. Underscoring the importance of immediately seizing all attacks against merchant ships, we reiterate our call for the full respect and implementation of the UN arms embargo against the Houthis by all. The core of regional tensions and turbulence lies where it all started on October 7, 2023, with the horrendous terrorist attack of Hamas on Israel. As discussed a week ago in this very chamber, for yet another time. A year and a half into this conflict, a severe humanitarian crisis has taken hold of the entire Gaza Strip, with the population facing conditions of distress and struggling to survive. We welcome the recent agreement between Israel and the European Union on scaling up humanitarian aid for the people in Gaza, as it provides some much-needed hope. The agreement demonstrates that dialogue with Israel can bear results. On this premise, we urge Israel to allow and facilitate the safe, unconditional, massive, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid into the Strip. We expect the agreed steps to be implemented with a sense of urgency. Allowing a substantially increased humanitarian aid to enter the Strip and opening the southern and northern crossings is imperative. Undoubtedly, to achieve this, the expertise of the United Nations, its agency network, and UNRWA remains invaluable. At the same time, we stress that any humanitarian plan must adhere to the core principles of international humanitarian law, cover all parts of Gaza, and support the existing humanitarian operations within the Strip. Israel's Gaza Humanitarian Fund plan falls short of this promise. As efforts led by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to secure a much-needed ceasefire deal are ongoing, let us recall that hostages continue to suffer, held in captivity by Hamas for 19 consecutive months. Having repeatedly condemned the October 7 terrorist attacks and the ongoing detention and inhumane treatment of hostages, we reiterate our demand for their immediate and unconditional release. We deplore the refusal of Hamas to hand them over. While conditions in Gaza remain dire, the security situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem also raises concerns. We condemn the escalation and the continued settler violence, the expansion of illegal settlements, and Israel's military operations. Settlement expansion is contrary to international law and the relevant Security Council resolutions, seriously undermining the prospects for a two-state solution. The repeated attacks on Taiba, one of the Christian majority villages in the West Bank, are particularly alarming. In the same vein, we express our deep sorrow for the tragic loss and casualties caused by the attack on the Catholic Church of the Holy Family in Gaza. Places of worship and religious sites should never be targeted. Mr. President, there is no military solution for Gaza. Greece, along with the United Kingdom and 27 international partners, recently came together with a simple yet urgent message. The war in Gaza must end now. The only solution for Gaza would be a political one. We thus look forward to the upcoming high-level conference on the implementation of the two-state solution under the co-chairpersonship of France and Saudi Arabia, hoping it will bring new impetus to the political process. In this spirit, Greece is ready to engage to bring the Arab plan, as presented by Egypt, forward, developing it further where necessary. The plan constitutes a constructive proposal for the day after, when an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority will be able to exert effective governance in Gaza and the West Bank, without any government or security role for Hamas, and definitely without any forced displacement of Palestinians. All sides must now harness the necessary political courage to agree to a ceasefire, end the war, and pave the way toward a political process towards two states living side by side in peace and security. Turning over to Syria, ahead of our monthly briefing next week, we echo the Secretary General's deep concern over the continued violence in the Druze majority area of Shueida, resulting in hundreds of casualties, including civilians, with reports also of summary executions. We condemn all acts of sectarian violence, echoing the Secretary General's plea towards the interim authorities and local leaders to de-escalate. We also echo the call towards the interim authorities to transparently and openly investigate the incidents, holding all those responsible into account. Finally, yet importantly, Lebanon seems to be staying the right course, albeit not without significant challenges. Aware of UNIFIL's importance in preserving the cessation of hostilities and thus for the maintenance of regional peace and security, Greece fully supports the mission's mandate renewal. All parties need to fully abide by Security Council Resolution 1701 and the provisions of the November ceasefire understanding, contributing to the security of both Israel and Lebanon. Reaffirming our commitment to the preservation of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we consider it imperative that we support the country's efforts to turn the page and the Lebanese government's efforts to extend its authority over the entire territory of Lebanon, while implementing much necessary reforms. We commend the progress of the Lebanese armed forces in the redeployment and bringing all weapons under state control, indicative of the Lebanese leadership's resolve in meeting its international obligations. Greece is steadfast in its commitment of support regional and international peace and security. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Greece. I would now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Minister. We welcome your presidency of this quarterly open debate in the Security Council on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. And we would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General Khaled Kiari for his detailed briefing. Today, in the Security Council chamber, once again, we are hearing very worrying assessments of the tragic developments in the Middle East. And this is both in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well as within the context of broader regional developments. And the root cause for essentially all of the Middle East crises and collisions which create challenges for the security of many countries in the region is the fact that the Palestinian issue remains unresolved. Whereas the main parameters for the settlement of this is something that the international community agreed many decades ago. As a result, a growing number of Middle Eastern countries are beginning to forget what peaceful life without bombs, explosions, and threats of full-scale hostilities is like. Unfortunately, during the time elapsed since our previous debates on this, a spiral of escalation in the region has become intensified and pulled new states into it. In June, we all witnessed a very sharp military confrontation between Iran and Israel. It was accompanied by the Western Jerusalem strikes, with support of Washington strikes, on the nuclear facilities in Iran, the facilities which were under IAEA safeguards. These unjustified attacks are not just a gross violation of the UN Charter, but they also severely undermine the foundations of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. We strongly and unconditionally condemn attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Through this act of aggression, Washington and West Jerusalem pushed the region to the brink of a large-scale war, which could have had the most dire radiological consequences, not just for Iran, but also for all of the states in the Middle East. Despite the announcement made by the Trump administration there was a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, despite that, the situation remains very fragile. As a matter of principle, we do not share the concept of peace through strength, which is taken on by Washington. The long-standing issues in the regions cannot be resolved this way, and new waves of violence can only compound the difficulties. What is needed is looking for political and diplomatic solutions within the Middle East settlement, but also more broadly regarding all of the conflicts in the region. The attempts to cowboy-style put the squeeze on some actors and intimidate others create a short-term effect and cannot provide for a long-term balance of interest in this very difficult Middle East landscape. West Jerusalem should finally understand that it's impossible to change geography and that Israel would have to coexist with all of its neighbors. And for that, Israel needs to have at least a minimal level of trust between Israel and them. This cannot be done when there is a continued radical anti-Palestinian rhetoric, when there is a denial of the right of Palestinians to exist within their own state. But unfortunately, what we're witnessing now is exactly the opposite. We, for example, are very worried by what is being said by Israeli leaderships when they're announcing their intent to resolve the issue of OPT, in particular in Gaza, in one fell swoop. This is shored up by the provocative plans to fully annex the Strip, and this is also shored up by other provocative public steps. As recently as yesterday, in the Knesset, there was a conference entitled Riviera in Gaza, From Ideal to Reality. During that conference, the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, said that he discussed with the leadership of Tzahal the parameters of gradually absorbing the Strip through recreating illegal settlements in Gaza. In other words, we're talking about recolonization, reoccupation of Palestinian territory here. This is a monstrously cynical approach, which essentially dooms the Palestinians to either death or exile. The moral and political duty of the international community here is to make sure that these plans do not come to be. The very way of phrasing this issue this way is unconscionable, even hypothetically, because it implies that the Palestinians are second-class people and they're not masters of their own fate. For now, the IDF continues clearing up the Strip, regardless of the number of victims of their military operation. It's about 60,000 Palestinians who died, and regardless of the Palestinian infrastructure destruction. Daily we receive information about hundreds of new victims amongst the people in Gaza, including in food distribution places in the vicinity of the infamous Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is nothing else than a means of using humanitarian assistance as a weapon or for blackmail. For example, in the last 24 hours, 99 Palestinians died. 26 of them were lining up for rations. There are also indiscriminate strikes against religious facilities. On the 18th of July, there was an attack against the only Catholic Church of Holy Family in Gaza. According to the information we're getting, this was a direct hit against the church, as a result of which parishioners and the clergy were seriously wounded. We strongly condemn this kind of action. We're most seriously concerned by the fact that the people in Gaza do not have an opportunity of obtaining adequate medical assistance. Essentially, all of the medical infrastructure in the Strip is destroyed. There are still shortages of all basic necessities, medicines, medical instruments, fuel, and even bags are needed for burial. Hospitals receive hundreds of patients daily, including children who are on the brink of death from starvation. According to the figures as of yesterday, in the past 48 hours, 33 people died from starvation. They're including 12 children. And these figures, as we all know, unfortunately, will only grow. Malnutrition is something that doctors and nurses are suffering from as well. They cannot expect to receive adequate food under essential blockade of Gaza either. Mr. President, we are convinced that all those present here very well know the assessment issued by international humanitarian organizations and UN agencies of what is happening in Gaza. They're saying that it goes beyond what is acceptable even at war. In November 2023, the Secretary General stated that Gaza had become a huge children's cemetery. Recently, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Mr. Lazzarini, described the situation in Gaza as hell on earth. Such assessments are issued by all humanitarians without exception, all of those who are working in the sector or traveling to it. How does Israel react to all of that? We have heard that today after the permanent representative of that country essentially stated that they will be squeezing OCHA from the occupied territory and there will be sanctions against its high-level representatives. We just need to find out now whether Washington is also going to be covering up for its allies without a murmur as well, whether they will support their new inhuman steps, which goes in counter to what in other instances they proclaim as to be human rights protection. How much longer will this terrible situation continue, which not only humiliates the Palestinians, but also undermines our own faith in the humanitarian ideals, humankind, and justice? Against the background of the disaster in Gaza, what is somewhat obscured is the situation on the West Bank. But unfortunately, this gives us equal reasons for worry because the military operation continues there, economic suffocation, and arbitrary arrest against the Palestinians, property expropriation, and demolition of houses. To this, we need to add the unconstrained violence by the settlers, very frequently under the lenient eye of the Israeli military, and the record pace of settlement construction, and at the same time an open declaration to annex the West Bank. This is part of the overall stance to destroy any kind of premise or an opportunity for Palestinians to have their own state, depriving them of the possibility to survive in the occupied territories. Can we really allow ourselves not to notice that and allow the Israeli policy of fait accompli the possibility of fully trample underfoot the international documents about a two-state solutions? Mr. President, the Russian approaches to the current situation in the OPT and in general to the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian settlement have been consistent and are based on obvious truths. We have consistently advocated in favor of an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and the release of all hostages and those who are forcibly detained, ensuring that there is safe and unimpeded humanitarian assistance, the relaunching of the peace process on the two-state basis, which would ensure the implementation of the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians. We need to always bear in mind the ultimate goal here, the creation of an independent Palestinian state and within the 1967 border with the capital in East Jerusalem, coexisting with Israel in peace and security. The attempts to put the Palestinian issue onto the back burner, including the issue of the historic injustice as regards the Palestinians' rights to self-determination and return, is one of the reasons there is a recurrence of violence not just in the Palestinian territories but in the region as a whole, as well as growth of extremism and terrorism. And the only way to overcome this is to consolidate the efforts of the international community on the basis of the universally acknowledged basis, with the main key element here, two-state formula. Overall, the issues in the OPT and in the region have become so tangled that the international community needs, at a minimum, to have a very thoughtful and unblinkered discussion here on how to overcome that. What is particularly relevant in this situation is the International High-Level Conference in support of Palestine next week. We note the efforts made here by our French and Saudi co-presidencies to organize a conference, and it is our expectation that the conference will work out specific steps for the UN member states and international community, including steps to recognize Palestine and to protect the specialized humanitarian agencies, first and foremost UNRWA. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Russian Federation. I would now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Assistant Secretary General Khiari for his comprehensive briefing. Since our last open debate, the Middle East has continued to grapple with escalating conflict, humanitarian suffering, and tragic loss of life. From a devastating humanitarian situation in Gaza to the unprecedented military escalation between Israel and Iran in light of Iran's accelerated nuclear trajectory. From the resumption of Houthi attacks against commercial shipping in the Red Sea to their continuous attack against Israel and its subsequent responses. Most recently, the fighting in the Soweto province of Syria and Israel's strikes against Syrian territory. We must do all we can to prevent further escalation and a wider regional war. For stability to be restored in the Middle East, all parties must exercise utmost restraint and recommit to diplomacy. The situation is simply too fragile and too dangerous. Mr. President, we are convening today less than 1 week ahead of the high-level conference on the two-state solution, a conference that has the potential to advance concrete solutions for Israelis and Palestinians alike. It takes place against a backdrop of appalling levels of human suffering in Gaza, the continued agony of Israeli hostages and their families, and a further deterioration in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We deplore the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, where the population has been squeezed into less than 14% of the territory. Their reality is one of imminent death by hostilities, starvation, or disease. a daily spectre of not knowing what to fear the most, dying from starvation or from seeking food. Most recently, civilians in northern Gaza were attacked while seeking aid from a coordinated WFP convoy. We strongly condemn all attacks on civilians seeking to obtain humanitarian aid. This needs to stop. Denmark's position is clear. Civilians, including humanitarians and UN personnel, as well as civilian infrastructure, must be protected in accordance with international law. We are deeply concerned by Israel's new evacuation orders encompassing the UN compound in Gaza, as well as the recent attacks on a warehouse and facility sheltering WHO staff. All UN premises are inviolable and must be protected. Humanitarian aid must flow freely, safely, and at scale into Gaza, in line with international humanitarian law. We have heard, time and time again, that the UN and its partners are ready to deliver. They must be allowed to do so. And the UN, including OCHA, has our full support. The vilification of UN organizations and rejection of visas for senior UN staff are in no one's interest. And until a two-state solution is realized, UNRWA continues to be uniquely mandated by the General Assembly to deliver essential state-like services to Palestine refugees. Denmark continues to call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, and for the immediate, unconditional, and dignified release of all hostages kept by Hamas. We reiterate that Hamas can never be allowed to play a role in the future of Gaza. Mr. President, developments in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are further jeopardizing the prospects of a two-state solution. They must not be ignored. Denmark condemns the continuing acceleration of settlement construction and intensification of settler attacks against Palestinians. Just last month, Israeli settlers endured as many as 100 Palestinians, the highest monthly figure since OCHA began documenting casualties in 2005. We reiterate that all Israeli settlements are a clear violation of international law and call on the Israeli authorities to cease all further expansions and hold settlers accountable for their crimes. In this regard, we strongly oppose Israel's decision to assume the long-stalled E1 settlement expansion plan, which was add more than 3,400 new units and essentially cut the West Bank in two. We reiterate that resolutions of this Council, including 2334, are not merely words on paper. They must be fully implemented. Mr. President, in closing, as we look to the next week's high-level conference, it is critical for the international community to come together to advance concrete measures for the implementation of a two-state solution. This remains the only viable path to sustainable peace in the Middle East and a future where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in peace and security. Meanwhile, we need to continue to work for de-escalation and lasting peace in the wider region. Denmark looks forward to contributing constructively to these ends. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Representative of Denmark. I would now give the floor to Representative of China.
Thank you, President. I welcome your presence, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Dar, and presiding over the meeting. I thank ASG Chiari for his briefing. For some time now, the Middle East has been mired in turmoil, with conflicts and confrontations escalating. The conflict in Gaza, dragging on for 21 months, has caused over 58,000 deaths and an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Israel's continued military attacks, restrictions on access to supplies, and the implementation of a militarized aid distribution mechanism have repeatedly led to heavy civilian casualties. Recently, Israel launched ground offensive against Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, attacked WHO facilities, and searched, interrogated, and even detained its staff. We strongly condemn these. Military means are not the right way to resolve issues. More killings will not bring lasting peace. China urges Israel to immediately cease all military operations in Gaza. fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, fully restore humanitarian access, and support the UN and other humanitarian organizations in their aid effort, China firmly supports the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and USG Fletcher in their work. The country with significant influence over the party concerned should adopt an impartial and responsible approach and truly play a positive and constructive role. While the fighting in Gaza rages on, the situation in the West Bank is very tense. So far this year, settlement expansion and settler violence have killed over 600 Palestinians and injured over 5,000. The international community has repeatedly affirmed that settlement activities violate international law and council resolutions and must cease immediately. Israel should stop its attacks on the West Bank, curb settler violence, and conduct impartial investigations of all attacks and pursue accountability. President, elsewhere in the Middle East, the challenges to peace and stability are equally daunting. Israel's continued attacks on Syria and Lebanon and its illegal military presence have increased tensions. The sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Syria and Lebanon must be fully respected, and the relevant Security Council resolutions should be effectively complied with. The Syrian interim authorities should promote an inclusive political process and effectively implement the obligations under international law, including counterterrorism. The international community should help and support the Lebanese government in its active governance. We call on the Houthis to stop targeting merchant ships, and all parties concerned to exercise calm and restraint in order to maintain the safety of shipping lanes in the Red Sea. It has been proved that war cannot resolve the Iranian nuclear issue, and a political solution is the only way forward. All parties should ensure that the ceasefire reached between Israel and Iran is effectively implemented and prevent the situation from escalating again. The parties concerned should restart dialogue and negotiations on an equal footing and address their legitimate concerns through consultations. Iran's commitment not to develop nuclear weapons should be taken seriously, and all parties should fully respect Iran's right to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy as a state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Relevant countries should abandon the practice of frequently resorting to threats and pressure, which will only intensify tensions and confrontations and even further undermine diplomatic efforts. President, lasting peace in the world would not be possible without a stable Middle East. The Middle East cannot remain under the shadow of conflicts forever, nor can its people continue to live in the insecurity of war. The question of Palestine lies at the heart of the Middle East issue, and the implementation of the two-state solution is the only viable way to resolving the question of Palestine. The international community must firmly reject unilateral actions that erode the foundation of the two-state solution and firmly oppose the dangerous attempts to annex Gaza and the West Bank. We welcome the high-level conference on the implementation of the two-state solution to be convened next week, and we look forward to its galvanizing strong momentum to the implementation of the two-state solution. I thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of China. I will now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, let me first thank Pakistan for convening this open debate and express our appreciation to ASG Khaled Khiari for his sobering briefing. His words echo what every soul in this chamber already knows, what the world sees, and what history will not forget: the catastrophic suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank alike. what we are witnessing is not war. It is annihilation, not only of people, but of life itself. This is a plan, a cruel, a deliberate plan to erase a people, to wipe away their roots from their homeland. But, Mr. President, no matter how many bombs fall, no matter how deep the pain of the Palestinian people in Gaza, Palestine is not living. Palestinians are not living. They are the olive tree, burned, broken, but never uprooted. The Israeli occupation may seem powerful, militarily overwhelmingly powerful. But is it eternal? Justice, however, long delayed, always finds its way. And the day will come when this horrible occupation ends. Mr. President, humanity is bleeding in Gaza. In the last 600 days. But so too is the very idea of law, of morality, of justice, of conscience. International law is being trampled. Famine is being openly used as a weapon. Just yesterday, 15 Palestinians died of hunger. The total is now 101, including 80 children. And these children are dying not from wounds, but from the silence of empty plates. In Gaza, famine is spreading like fire through dry land. It touches everyone. It affects everyone: doctors, nurses, journalists, humanitarian workers, UN staff. It affects everyone: children, mothers, the elderly. Yes, Gaza is starving. And the world, the international community, is only contemplating. And the Security Council is watching with no action. The cause is clear. The solution is well known. As Médecins Sans Frontières medical coordinator in Gaza said plainly, the starvation of people in Gaza is intentional. It could end tomorrow if Israeli authority allow food in at scale. But instead, aid convoys are blocked. Humanitarian centers are attacked. And the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I should say Gaza Hunger Foundation, has tragically become a death trap. A trap endangering the very lives of the starving Palestinians that it claims feeding. As one of 3 Gazans does not eat for days, aid is no more a race for life. It has become a race to death. More than 1,000 people killed, over 6,500 injured, just for seeking help, just for seeking food, just for reaching out of bread. This is the blatant reality. As of today, almost 60,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli occupying forces, while more than 143,000 have been injured. We will not forget them. Those who have committed these crimes, yes, crimes, should not, cannot lecture us on morality, on respect of human dignity, on respect of international humanitarian law. If they are keen to know the reality in the enclave, they should allow access, free access, in Gaza of journalists, human rights mandate holders, credible international NGOs, to investigate and to report to the world on the real situation in Gaza. And today, humanitarian organizations are attacked not only in the enclave, but also in this chamber. UNRWA, OCHA, WFP, ICRC, WHO. No flag protect them anymore. No UN flag, no cross, no crescent, no dove. Why? They tell the truth about the horrible situation in Gaza. They are the witness of a genocide. Mr. President, a ceasefire is long overdue. Yet this Council remains bound by silence. We must not wait for permission to end the slaughter of dreams. Let us declare a ceasefire, unconditional and permanent ceasefire, not as a gesture, but as a duty to what remains of our shared soul, our shared mandate in this Security Council. Let us shield the remnant of dignity from the dust of collapsing home in Gaza, from the cries of children buried under the rubble. Mr. President, this pattern is not limited to Gaza. In the West Bank, we are witnessing an alarming escalation. Israel has announced a plan for further expanding settlements, open step toward annexation. Settler terrorism has reached unprecedented levels. Palestinians are being pushed out of their lands, of their homes. Their villages are burned. Their trees are chopped. Their lives, their family lives, are shattered. Even the sacred is not spared. Settlers repeatedly assault Al-Aqsa Mosque and attacks churches. Now, the famous Ibrahimi Mosque is under threat. Algeria condemns in the strongest terms these attacks and this violation of international law. And while we speak of Palestine, while we reaffirm the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, to sovereignty over their land, while we advocate for the implementation of the two-state solution, the Knesset voted just today, not for peace, not for justice, but to claim what is not theirs. They call occupation sovereignty, sovereignty over the West Bank. What will the international community, what will this Security Council say this time? Another statement? Another immoral silence. President, to this barbarity, our answer must be enforcing respect of human rights, enforcing respect for human dignity. To starvation, our answer must be enforcing lifeline aid. To injustice, our answer must be the supremacy of law. Enforcing the supremacy of law. And to the attempt to erase a nation, a Palestinian nation, our answer must be the establishment of a Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Algeria. I now give the floor to Representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sierra Leone thanks the Presidency for convening this important and timely debate. The protracted crisis in the Middle East continues to demand the Council's urgent attention, principled clarity, and resolute action. I thank Assistant Secretary General Kerry for his detailed briefing. Mr. President, across the region, fragility remains a defining feature. While recent de-escalations in Lebanon and between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the State of Israel offer some measure of relief, other theaters remain dangerously unstable. Nowhere is this more pronounced than in the Syrian Arab Republic, where the resurgence of violence has taken a devastating toll. We reiterate our call for full respect and implementation of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement between Israel and Syria. All parties must uphold the ceasefire, exercise maximum restraint, and refrain from actions that could further destabilize the region. In this regard, we recall the primary responsibility of the Syrian authorities to ensure the safety and protection of all civilians, including religious and ethnic minorities. This responsibility is not only a matter of national duty, but a legal obligation under international humanitarian and human rights law. Turning to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, the scale and depth of human suffering in Gaza over the past months defy comprehension. The cruelty and violence endured by civilians are deeply distressing and should stir the conscience of the international community. Yet, despite repeated calls for restraint and adherence to international obligations, meaningful action by those with the power to stop the suffering remains regrettably insufficient. Sierra Leone is particularly alarmed by three interrelated trends. First, the systematic obstruction of humanitarian access. Humanitarian actors, including United Nations agencies, have been impeded by access restrictions, targeted attacks, and the militarization of aid delivery points. These developments have rendered many humanitarian corridors perilous rather than protective, with the humanitarian architecture pushed to the brink of collapse. Essential life-saving assistance continues to be hindered by bureaucratic, political, and operational constraints. Second, the targeting and destruction of cultural, religious, and historic sites. Attacks on places of worship, cemeteries, and culturally significant landmarks are not merely acts of war. They seek to erase the identity and heritage of an entire people. When coupled with widespread destruction of homes, schools, and civilian infrastructure, these actions signal an alarming pattern of displacement and dispossession. Third, the deprivation of basic necessities. The use of siege tactics, repeated bombardments, and forced evacuations, including the recent evacuation order covering about 5.6 square kilometers of Deir Bala, which spans from neighborhoods, leaving the millions of Palestinians confined to ever-shrinking spaces, often without access to adequate food, clean water, or medical care. The use of starvation as a method of warfare is a grave breach of international humanitarian law. Even more concerning is reports that the latest evacuation orders affect United Nations premises and warehouses, which are protected under international law. We are also deeply concerned that the WHO staff residence was attacked 3 times in the last few days. We reiterate that the parties to the conflict must respect the inviolability of all United Nations staff, premises, warehouses, and other civilian sites. Taken together, these patterns point to a deeply troubling possibility: the risk of acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. As affirmed by International Court of Justice in its provisional measures, the 1948 Genocide Convention obliges international community to prevent such outcomes once the risk becomes known. To be clear, the invocation of atrocity prevention is not an attack on any state, religion, or people. It is rather a principled insistence on the rule of law, accountability, and the protection of civilians. Criticism of militia conduct or state policy must not be conflated with identity-based hate. Such confliction only serves to erode efforts towards peace, justice, and reconciliation. Mr. President, Sierra Leone unequivocally condemns the attacks of 7 October 2023 perpetrated by Hamas and other armed groups. The deliberate targeting of civilians and taking of hostages are unacceptable and constitute serious violations of international law. These crimes must be addressed through lawful and accountable means. However, we maintain that one atrocity cannot justify another. The principles of proportionality, distinction, and necessity must be upheld at all times. We also express grave concern regarding developments in the West Bank, where increasing settler violence, forced evictions, and demolitions further erode the prospects of peace and violate established norms under the 4th Geneva Convention. These acts threaten to undermine not only the two-state solution, but also the long-term stability of the region. Accordingly, Sierra Leone calls for the following. First, an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and the West Bank as a necessary step to halt further loss of life and enable the restoration of humanitarian operations. Second, the release of all hostages, both Israeli civilians unlawfully held by Hamas and Palestinian detainees held without due process. Third, full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access. We welcome recent initiatives to expand and aid delivery, but stress that these measures must be scaled up and the blockade lifted and militarization abandoned. Fourth, food compliance with ICJ's provisional measures, particularly those related to facilitating humanitarian aid and protecting civilians. The work of UNRWA and other UN agencies on the ground must be preserved and strengthened. Fifth, the rejection of any effort towards permanent displacement of Palestinians. Those forcibly removed must be allowed to return home when conditions allow. The right to self-determination must be respected and upheld. Ultimately, there must be a credible return to the political track. A two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine remains the only viable and just path towards sustainable peace. In this context, we welcome the forthcoming international conference to be convened by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and all relevant parties to engage constructively. We also commend the mediation efforts led by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, which have helped facilitate temporary humanitarian pauses. Mr. President, the Middle East stands at a critical crossroads. The suffering of civilians in Gaza, the instability in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and the stagnation of the peace process collectively underscore the need for renewed leadership and firm action. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Sierra Leone. I would now give the floor to the representative of France. Thank you, Mr. Representative of Sierra Leone. I would now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I wish to thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Khaled Kiari, for his briefing. And I closely followed what was said by the Observer State of Palestine and the Permanent Representative of Israel. The priority in the Near East is to obtain a ceasefire, one that is permanent and immediate in Gaza. The immediate and unconditional release of all hostages that have been illegally detained by Hamas, and the unfettered at-scale delivery of humanitarian aid. France continues to work tirelessly to achieve that goal. And we welcome the efforts made by its partners in that connection. France firmly condemns the expansion of the Israeli offensive to the center of Gaza. Their evacuation orders have prompted the displacement of tens of thousands of people in Deir el-Balah and have hampered the work of manifold UN agencies. UN agencies that France once again would like to state that we support and trust them. That begins with UNRWA and the BCHH. The people, their personnel pay a disproportionate price for this tragedy. This new operation is worsening the humanitarian situation at an ever quicker pace. That situation is marked by malnutrition and the risk of famine. This situation is the result of the blockade imposed by Israel. France condemns in the very strongest terms Israeli fire on Palestinians in Gaza as they attempt to obtain humanitarian aid. This fire is thought to have killed over 1,000 people in recent months, or more according to the UN. Any attempts to bring about the forced displacement of Gaza's people, be these open or covert, are illegal and unacceptable. In the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, settlement activity must stop. It is a breach of international law. France staunchly opposes the resumption of the E1 settlement project. This project must not see the light of day. It is a violation of international law. It threats the prospect of the two-state solution. We must build an alternative to war in order to meet the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinians of having a state and to allow the Israelis and the Palestinians to live in peace and in security. The gravity of the situation in the Middle East must not distract the Council from what is happening in Lebanon, in Syria, and the Red Sea. In Lebanon, in spite of the manifold obstacles, we must continue our efforts to comprehensively implement Resolution 1701. That text has become all the more relevant following the ceasefire agreement of 26th of November 2024. The restoration of the Lebanese state's authority across its territory depends on implementing that resolution. They must retain the monopoly over the use of force across the full extent of Lebanese territory. To achieve that goal, renewing UNIFIL's mandate is vital if we are to support efforts taken in this connection on the part of Lebanese Authority and the LAF. In Syria, the ceasefire obtained last Saturday thanks to the US mediation efforts must be upheld. Humanitarian aid must be delivered in an unfettered fashion to Ceuta, and civilians that wish to do so must be able to be evacuated in absolute safety. We call upon Israel to refrain from any and all unilateral actions likely to sow instability in Syria. The goal for this council must be to ensure that Syria is able to achieve an inclusive transition, to restore civic peace and recover its economy. The reconfiguration of the UN's presence in Syria must make it possible to support those goals. This is also the rationale behind France's efforts in support of the Syrian transitional authorities. In Yemen and the Red Sea, as in the rest of the region, the Houthis must put an end once and for all to their destabilizing actions in the Middle East. France calls for the resumption of the inter-Yemeni peace process under the aegis of the UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, who France fully supports. These efforts must allow us to fully implement the political, security and economic roadmap. Mr. President, a ceasefire agreement in Gaza could allow the Middle East to write a new chapter with the resumption of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. France is doing all it can to achieve that goal. With that in mind, we will co-chair alongside Saudi Arabia a high-level conference on the 28th and 29th of July. This conference aims to ensure that the two-state solution can reach fruition through concrete steps. The conference also aims to spark anew a broad dynamic in favor of a political solution which meets the legitimate security concerns of Israel and which ultimately guarantees the contiguity and viability of the Palestinian state. The conference will strive to foster the recognition of Palestine, the normalization of its relations with Israel, and regional integration, as well as the reform of Palestinian governance and the disarmament of Hamas. We call upon all member states to participate at that conference at the highest possible level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of France. I would now give the floor to Representative of Panama.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We thank His Excellency Mohammed Sagdar, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, for having convened this important meeting and for presiding over it. We also wish to thank Mr. Khalid Kiari, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, for his briefing. We welcome the ministers, senior officials and representatives from delegations. We thank them for their participation. The Middle East continues to be the epicenter of a growing conflict, the reach of which seems only to grow. Panama is monitoring with grave concern the dire situation which continues to prevail in the Syrian Arab Republic. There, countless outbreaks of violence have occurred, sectarian violence that is, have occurred in quick succession. These not only threaten the country's internal stability, but also the security of the region as a whole. We condemn the recent escalation of violence against civilians, including against religious and minority communities in Syria. We specifically refer here to the 22nd of June attack against the Greek Orthodox Church of Mar Elias in Damascus. We're also thinking of the sectarian violence in Sueda and the military operations in densely populated areas such as Daraa and the capital Damascus. Against this backdrop, we reiterate that it is necessary to give a real chance to a political transition in Syria so that that transition can be genuinely inclusive and sovereign, in accordance with the parameters established by Security Council Resolution 2254. This transition should be buttressed by the constructive support of the international community, in particular that of the United Nations and its specialized agencies. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the humanitarian situation remains devastating. More than 80% of Gaza's population is displaced. They're living in bitterly difficult conditions with no adequate access to water, food, medical care, or basic services. The health system has collapsed, and thousands of children are suffering acute malnutrition. That is a humanitarian tragedy which demands urgent attention. Panama reiterates its urgent appeal for the restoration of an immediate ceasefire which can halt human suffering, facilitate the sustained, unfettered delivery of vital humanitarian aid at scale to Gaza, and one that can guarantee the immediate, dignified and unconditional release of all hostages that remain in Hamas's hands. We fervently condemn once again Hamas's actions. Since May, at least some hundreds and hundreds of people have died while trying to access humanitarian aid in Gaza. That fact bears witness to the people's desperation and to the risks linked with assistance mechanisms alternative to those operated by the UN system. We insist that any effort must be governed by the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. That is, humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. It comes as a surprise, and therefore it is a source of grave concern to note that due to an apparent lack of political will, or for other reasons which defy comprehension, it has not yet been possible to effectively deliver the aid in appropriate quantities as required desperately by the people of Gaza. This aid delivery must involve the participation of UN agencies. They have proven that they have the track record, experience, and capacity necessary to perform that task. Other stakeholders can join these UN efforts if they are able to complement the UN's work whilst adhering to humanitarian principles. With this in mind, Panama reaffirms its support for the UN agencies, including UNRWA and OCHA. And we once again reiterate our support for their personnel. Their humanitarian work has been vital, even in the most challenging environments. They have paid a high price with their sacrifice. All international efforts must be designed in such a way as to supplement and strengthen and not substitute or exclude existing humanitarian mechanisms. We're also concerned by the ever-worsening conditions in the West Bank. Their restrictions are worsening the suffering of the Palestinian people. The rising tide of regional instability has had repercussions in Lebanon. There, cross-border clashes and attacks continue along the Blue Line. This in spite of the ceasefire achieved in November 2024. Civilian victims have been produced and more than 93,000 people have been displaced. The Lebanese government and armed forces continue to face severe operational constraints in terms of exercising effective control in the south of the country, as the Council Resolution 1701 states that they must. Panama reiterates its staunch support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Lebanon, and its full support for the mandate of the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL. UNIFIL's work is vital if we are to avoid a regional escalation. We urge all parties to guarantee UNIFIL's freedom of movement, to step up tripartite coordination mechanisms, and to bolster their commitment to Resolution 1701 as the cornerstone from which we can move towards lasting peace and stability. The recent escalation between Israel and Iran made it patently clear that the region is highly interconnected. Tensions spiked and grave concern was sparked at an international level by the escalation. We also saw through that escalation the reach that a regional clash can have. It can unleash a snowball effect which not only has an impact on the countries directly involved, but also an impact on their allies and neighbours, and is liable to further complicate the geopolitical landscape. In this connection, we note with particular attention and optimism the recent cessation of hostilities agreement reached between the parties. That is a crucial step forward. We reiterate our appeal for diplomatic dialogue as the only legitimate and sustainable path along which to achieve peaceful and lasting solutions to the conflicts affecting the region. Regrettably, we have noted the resumption of illegal and unjustified attacks against merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea, waged by the Houthis. These attacks threaten maritime security and the freedom of navigation for vessels, and they imperil human lives as well as gravely affecting global supply chains. These attacks also hamper the delivery of essential humanitarian aid across the region. In Yemen, more than 5.2 million people are experiencing emergency levels of acute food insecurity. 11.9 million are in a situation of crisis. That is a reflection of the colossal humanitarian challenges facing the region. Mr. President, all of the above makes it patently clear that no event in the Middle East occurs in isolation. Consequently, we must take immediate and coordinated action to support the region as a whole. Ours must be a holistic approach, one which prioritizes both security and humanitarian assistance. The people of the Middle East have suffered the consequences of conflicts which are often fueled always fueled indeed by external geopolitical dynamics. These dynamics have perpetuated the cycle of violence. As Security Council members, we have a moral and political duty to actively contribute to changing this status quo. Our commitment must also hold steadfast when it comes to rebuilding the region. We must not only rebuild its infrastructure, but also its social fabric. If there is one truth that we must acknowledge about the Middle East, it is that this is a region comprising profoundly resilient people, each of which deserve a different now and a future full of hope. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Panama. Now I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to start by thanking Assistant Secretary General Chiari for his briefing. President, my Foreign Secretary has been unequivocal. The war in Gaza must end now. Hamas and Israel must both commit to a ceasefire now. A ceasefire is within reach, and we urge all sides to make it a reality, to secure the release of the hostages who have been cruelly held by Hamas since the 7th of October, and to end the appalling suffering of Palestinian civilians. I'll make 3 points. First, the Israeli aid system is inhumane, ineffective, dangerous, and fueling instability. Reports and images this week of children dying from starvation are beyond horrific. The IDF is shooting at desperate Palestinian civilians on an almost daily basis. Hamas is exploiting this disorder. We call on Israel to end these attacks, hold those responsible to account, and to work with the UN to implement effective aid distribution in line with humanitarian principles and international humanitarian law. And let me reaffirm the UK's firm and unequivocal support for the UN and OCHA in their brave efforts to get aid into Gaza. We also condemn recent strikes on the WHO in Deir el-Balah. Humanitarians and civilians must be protected. Second, we condemn Defence Minister Katz's proposals of forced displacement to Rafah. Illegal settlement expansion in the West Bank continues at pace, as well as settler violence and even terrorism against Palestinians. This is an accelerating campaign to prevent a Palestinian state. We condemn these attacks and call for Israel to hold its citizens to account. We also oppose the reintroduction of the E1 settlement plan, which is a flagrant breach of international law. Third, we are clear that Hamas must play no future role in the governance of Gaza or be able to threaten Israel's security again. However, the organization which represents a credible alternative to Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, is being undermined by Israeli actions. Israel is withholding $2.6 billion in clearance revenues, crippling the Palestinian economy and pushing essential health and education services to the brink. This is not conducive to Israel's security. President, the United Kingdom is resolute in our commitment to a two-state solution, and my Foreign Secretary has been clear that we are prepared to take further action to prevent the forcible erosion of the only viable path to lasting peace. Next week's conference, co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, is a vital opportunity to demonstrate the strength of international resolve to secure a better future for Israelis, Palestinians, and the region. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Representative of the United Kingdom. I would now give the floor to Representative of Guyana.
Your Excellency, Senator Mohammed Ishaq Dar, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan. At the outset, my delegation thanks you for convening today's open debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Khaled Kiari for the important updates provided, particularly regarding the persistent and inhumane crisis being experienced by civilians in Gaza. Mr. President, Guyana remains deeply concerned at the ongoing volatile security situation in the Middle East, fueled primarily by the violation of international law and the resort to forceful measures in response to perceived or real security threats. Should this trend continue, the insecurity and instability in the Middle East could destabilize the entire international system. Guyana continues to follow developments in the occupied Palestinian territories, where this trend is most pronounced. In Gaza, the result after 21 months of war is a humanitarian crisis of immense scale. Briefings by the United Nations over this period have highlighted massive and multiple instances of displacement of civilians, widespread food insecurity, with the risk of famine extremely high, and reports of even babies starving to death, and the inadequacy of the humanitarian response due to ongoing restrictions imposed by Israel. It is particularly striking, Mr. President, that an average of 28 children are killed daily in Gaza, as reported by UNICEF. Nothing can justify this crisis that has been deliberately created and foisted on Palestinian civilians. After witnessing the devastation in Gaza for almost 2 years, Guyana reiterates its call on Israel to comply with its obligations under international law, including those governing occupation and the conduct of war. Mr. President, Excellencies, evidence has shown that misinformation has been used as a weapon in this war. We have seen this in the allegations against UNRWA of being involved in terrorist activities, resulting in funding cuts to the agency last year, and ultimately to the Israeli government taking legislative action against it. This happened despite the lack of incontrovertible evidence to support the allegations. We are witnessing the same strategy at work regarding the operations of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF. Despite the evidence that the GHF is not operating in accordance with humanitarian principles, and the deliberate and daily killing and injury of civilians at GHF sites, we are told that the GHF is the best option to deliver aid to Palestinian civilians in need. The reports from the United Nations, however, tell a completely different story, which is also corroborated by reports from international NGOs and media sources privy to the situation in Gaza. It is important to counter all false narratives about what is happening in Gaza as a critical step towards addressing the impunity that has characterized actions there and for promoting accountability. We continue to rely on the UN and its partners in Gaza to this end. Mr. President, we continue to deplore the indiscriminate manner of Israel's strikes in Gaza, where it appears that virtually nothing is off limits. Targets have included people sheltering in schools and tents, people seeking food, water, nutrition supplies, or other assistance, medical and humanitarian relief personnel, and journalists. Following last week's strike on the Holy Family Church in Gaza, we took note of the explanation provided by the Israeli Defense Force, including its assertion that it directs its strikes solely at military targets. Guyana stresses that there should be no trivializing of the very serious consequences of Israel's war in Gaza, which has resulted in thousands of casualties. These consequences cannot be explained away. The road to accountability begins with fully acknowledging all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Excellencies, it is urgent that the parties reach agreement on a ceasefire in Gaza. The civilian cause continues to be alarming. It is also urgent that all hostages being held captive in Gaza be released without conditions. In the same vein, Palestinians detained in Israel without charge must also be released. The safety of humanitarian personnel must be guaranteed if they are to take full advantage of the limited lifting of restrictions on humanitarian access into Gaza. Moreover, we call on Israel to cooperate with the United Nations and its humanitarian partners to ensure that they can deliver life-saving assistance to civilians. Taking note of reports of plans to create a containment zone in Rafah, Guyana calls on Israel not to pursue any such plan that would further restrict the movement of civilians in Gaza and confine them to an even smaller space. We call for an end to the ongoing displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. We also call for an end to the ongoing violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, including violence perpetrated by settlers. Excellency, allow me to conclude by urging the Security Council to safeguard the rights of Palestinians. At the heart of this is enabling the exercise of their right to self-determination through the implementation of the two-state solution. Guyana remains fully supportive of this objective and hopes that the high-level conference on the two-state solution next week will advance this process. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Representative of Guyana. I will now give the floor to the representative of United States.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Dar, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Chiari, for your briefing. Colleagues, the Middle East has a clear path to a better future. This Council must take concrete steps toward durable peace and prosperity. That starts with a future for the people in Gaza that is free of Hamas. This Council must meet the moment by pressuring Hamas to accept the ceasefire proposal already accepted by Israel, release the 50 remaining hostages held for more than 650 days, and disarm and leave Gaza forever. Shielding Hamas from accountability undermines Israel's security, rewards terrorism, and does nothing to improve the lives of Palestinians. We remind this Council and the world that there are still 2 American citizens, Itai Hen and Omer Nutra, held by Hamas. We also underscore that Hamas has held Hadar Goldin since 2014. It is past time for Hamas to return all those it has taken hostage. Hamas bears sole responsibility for the massacre it perpetrated on October 7th. It is likewise responsible for the resumption of hostilities in March, following Hamas's rejection of multiple ceasefire proposals. Mr. President, the representative of Israel has addressed allegations of genocide made by some in this room. I am also compelled to speak on this. These accusations are politically motivated and categorically false. They are part of a deliberate, cynical propaganda campaign as Hamas attempts to win symbolic victories to compensate for total defeat in war. The United States refutes these allegations entirely. America fully supports Israel's right to defend itself. Israel has taken numerous measures to limit harm to civilians and to address humanitarian needs. The loss of civilian life in Gaza is tragic, but the responsibility for this rests with Hamas, which could also stop the fighting today by agreeing to a ceasefire already accepted by Israel. I will also address allegations of Israel's plans to move Gazans to other countries. The United States does not support the forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. President Trump has said that nobody is expelling any Palestinians from Gaza. We also underscore, Mr. President, Hamas must accept the deal on the table. Anything short will only perpetuate the suffering of hostages in captivity, of their families desperate to unite with loved ones, and of Gazans who deserve to live free of Hamas's tyranny. Mr. President, with respect to the dire humanitarian situation, no one wants to see Palestinians in Gaza go hungry or thirsty. The United States supports getting assistance to civilians in Gaza. This should happen in a way that does not allow Hamas to benefit. We recognize the IDF's ongoing efforts to prevent civilian harm in Gaza. By contrast, Hamas's use of civilians as human shields is a deplorable violation of international humanitarian law. The United States stands for the protection of civilian lives during armed conflict in compliance with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, with respect to deaths of Palestinians while seeking aid, the United States mourns the loss of all innocent lives, and we agree that more assistance needs to safely reach those in need. I would point out that the most recent tragedy occurred near UN convoys after they passed through the Zakim crossing. It is unfortunate that the UN continues to turn down the offers of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to collaborate and coordinate aid efforts. The United States also offers condolences for those killed at the Holy Family Church in Gaza. We have asked Israel to investigate the strike and ensure that all civilians, including Christians, remain safe. And with respect to the death of the American citizen in the West Bank, as Ambassador Huckabee has said, we have asked Israel to aggressively investigate the killing of Saif Masalat, an American citizen who was visiting family in Sinjil when he was beaten to death. There must be accountability for this criminal and terrorist act. Our condolences are with Saif's family. And we condemn criminal violence by any party in the West Bank and support actions to ensure all civilians, including Christian civilians, remain safe. The future for the Palestinians must start in Gaza without Hamas. Hamas must disarm and leave Gaza, and the hostages must return home. Quiet diplomacy, not performative actions in New York or elsewhere, will achieve that goal. Mr. President, turning to Iran, we are likewise at a critical juncture. On June 21st, the United States devastated Iran's nuclear facilities to end Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and stop the threat posed by the world's foremost state sponsor of terror in support of Israel's right of collective self-defense. Now, with the U.S. negotiated ceasefire having brought an end to the 12-day war, Tehran faces a choice. On the one hand, Iran can continue its current path of defying the NPT-mandated safeguards obligations in a bid to reconstitute its nuclear program in secrecy. Already, Iran's law to suspend cooperation with the IAEA has obscured international visibility into its program. Iran can also continue to route vital state resources to a network of proxies and partners abroad to undermine regional security. Or, on the other hand, Iran can pursue a different course, ending its path to a nuclear weapon through meaningful, time-bound diplomacy. This track is the only means of realizing a durable peace, and with it, greater prosperity and global integration for Iran and its people. This path remains the preferred of the United States. We urge Iran to take it. In the absence of a deal, the United States continues to impose maximum diplomatic and economic pressure to constrain any activities, like the pursuit of a nuclear weapon, that would threaten the security of U.S. citizens, personnel, and partners in the region. We emphasize the July 1st statement of the G7 foreign ministers, which, first, reaffirmed that Iran can never have nuclear weapons and must refrain from reconstituting its unjustified enrichment activities. Second, called upon Iran to urgently resume full cooperation with the IAEA, including by providing verifiable information about all nuclear material in Iran and providing access to IAEA inspectors. And third, condemned the reprehensible calls in Iran for Director General Grossi's arrest and execution. Colleagues, the members of this council and the world must stand united in ensuring Iran never obtains or develops a nuclear weapon. The United States will do its part to help forge a new reality for the Middle East alongside Israel and our Arab partners. It is our responsibility to realize the Middle East that earlier generations dreamt of, a region of peace, prosperity, safety, harmony, opportunity, innovation, and achievement. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Representative of United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also join other colleagues thanking ASG colleague Kiri for his comprehensive briefing. Mr. President, for millennia, the Middle East has been a crossroad of civilization, with its abundant historical, cultural, and religious heritage. However, what we have been witnessing for almost 2 years now, unfortunately, represent a painful cycle of profound instability, the denial of coexistence, and a total destruction of a shared humanity. Hamas committed the worst terrorist attacks against Israel and still brutally holds 50 hostages. Israel's airstrikes and gunfire, as well as restrictions to humanitarian aid, are pushing Palestinian civilians in Gaza deeper into death and starvation. Not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, the Palestinian people's right to life, dignity, and coexistence is repeatedly being denied. In the wider Middle East region, sirens and airstrikes have become the new normal. Keeping in mind the pressing urgency in addressing these concerning realities, let me stress the following 3 points. First, we call on all parties in the region, notably Israel and Hamas, to recover common humanity. The horrific casualties, including 17,000 children killed in Gaza, the hunger, chaos, and killing in and around the GHF distribution sites, and the widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, including religious, health, and UN sites, all elucidate staggering evidence of a loss of fundamental humanity. Meanwhile, we will not forget the terror and the shock that Hamas inflicted on Israel on October 7th, 2023. It is unconscionable that Hamas again still holds hostages and remains underneath tunnels, regardless of the fear and despair of civilians in Gaza. As starvation surges, we call on Israel to end all restrictions on humanitarian assistance and allow the UN to deliver life-saving aid to those in need throughout Gaza. In this respect, we reaffirm our strong support for all humanitarian agencies of UN, including OCHA and UNRWA. Both parties must protect civilians and faithfully engage in talks to secure an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages. The war in Gaza must end now. Second, Israel and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians must coexist in lasting peace and security. Any action that hinders this simple but clear proposition must immediately come to a halt. Violence by settlers in the West Bank, regardless of the nationality of the victims, is unacceptable. And thus, all perpetrators must be held accountable in accordance with clear international standards. Israel must cease settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, which are contrary to international law and Security Council resolutions. We oppose the announcement by Israel on the resumption of E1 settlements. This only will bifurcate a non-contiguous West Bank and further hamper future prospect for the two-state solutions. We also reject calls to forcibly relocate Palestinians in or outside of Gaza, such as the so-called humanitarian city plan, slated for the rubble where the city of Rafah once stood. We continue to extend our consistent support on efforts to revive the two-state solution. Third, all players must strive for de-escalation and stability throughout the region through diplomacy. We call on key players in the regions to adhere to the purpose and principles of the UN Charter, including the peaceful settlement of disputes and respect for territorial sovereignty. All actions that further aggravate insecurity, either on land or sea, must stop. Amid the endless spillover of violence in the region, we must seek ways to achieve peace through dialogue and diplomacy. In particular, ongoing talks in the region on non-proliferation now provide us with an important moment for diplomacy. We thus call on all parties in the region to seize any opportunity to secure regional peace and stability for the benefits of the people. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Rais.
Mr. President, at the outset, I express my country's appreciation for holding this open debate at a time when the challenges and accumulated crises facing the Middle East region are escalating without any bold and rooted solutions. I would also like to thank Mr. Khaled Khayari, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, for his valuable briefing on current developments. Mr. President, the occupied Palestinian territory, and in particular the Gaza Strip, continue to witness one of the most tragic human tragedies in modern times. With the number of victims exceeding 56,000, most of them women and children, with unprecedented destruction of civilian infrastructure, and millions
deprived of water, food, or health care, the moral and legal imperative demands urgent and decisive action by this Council. The situation in Gaza has entered the stage of a de facto famine, with daily cases of children and adults collapsing as a result of severe malnutrition, a number of civilians dying as a result of military action, and others died starving to death in a scene that embodies a collective moral and humanitarian failure. Civilians have been deprived of even a crumb of bread, a drop of water, in clear violation of the Geneva Conventions and all rules of international humanitarian law. Somalia reiterates its call for a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire, the lifting of the unjust blockade imposed on the Strip, and the unhindered and safe delivery of humanitarian aid. This in accordance with the principles of international humanitarian law. We also reaffirm our unwavering position in support of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to the establishment of their independent state along the borders of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in line with relevant international resolutions. In this vein, we would welcome the initiative of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia later this month to reiterate our support to the two-state solutions and stress our commitment for collective action to achieve that end. In the occupied West Bank, the situation is worsening day by day, with illegal settlement expansion, repeated military incursions, and daily attacks by settlers on Palestinian villagers, farmers, and property in direct defiance of international law and Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 2334. We warn against the continuation of this trend, which directly undermines any prospects for a peace process, perpetuates a colonialist reality on the ground, and deepens the frustration and anger of entire generations of Palestinians. As far as Syria is concerned, Mr. President, the ongoing crisis continues to cast a heavy shadow over millions of civilians. Despite this grim reality, Somalia welcomes the ceasefire agreement in Suaida Governorate. We hope that it represents a stepping stone towards a broader pacification of the situation. However, we express our deep concern at the same time over the repeated attacks on Syrian territory, including the recent shelling of sites that reached Damascus and other sites in southern Syria. The exploitation of certain local shifts within the Syrian society does not in any way justify the violation of Syria's sovereignty. Such acts constitute a flagrant violation of the UN Charter and all international norms. It also jeopardizes the stability of Syria and the entire region. We reaffirm our support for a comprehensive, Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political solution in accordance with Resolution 2254. In Lebanon, the continued violations on the south necessitate the adherence to Resolution 1701, and we need the continued support of all Lebanese institutions, including the Lebanese army, to ensure the unity and stability of Lebanon. Mr. President, the escalation is no longer confined to a single arena. Over the past months, we have seen repeated aggression against Gaza, clashes in southern Lebanon, attacks on Syria and a dangerous escalation between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran that lasted for 12 days. We warn of the grave consequences of this type of regional escalation, this multi-front escalation that threatens to widen the conflict in the entire region. It could make it a constant and central source of tension and destabilization in the Middle East. In conclusion, Mr. President, the stability and safety of the Middle East are intertwined with the stability of the international order at whole. The continued violations and turning a blind eye to their crises and their perpetrators undermine the legitimacy of the law-based international order. It only fosters double standards. It is high time for the Security Council to shoulder its historic responsibility and stand in the face of the violations that threaten regional and international security. It must empower just and sustained political solutions while protecting civilians. Today, we need the voice of justice, not that of weapons or exceptions. Adherence to the spirit and text of the UN Charter will remain the best and most successful framework to ensure coexistence and stability in the Middle East and the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Somalia. I will now give the floor to Representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Dar, and I thank Assistant Secretary General Chiari for his briefing. Mr. President, Slovenia firmly believes that peace is a choice. The only path to lasting peace in the Middle East is for military options to give way to diplomatic ones. And strategy of zero-sum game and terror are replaced by acceptance of a shared future. Let me make 3 points today. Firstly, we remain heartbroken about the situation in Gaza. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire. We demand the release of all hostages. We call for humanitarian aid to be delivered at scale across the Gaza Strip. The UN and its agencies are the only one able of this humongous task. They have proven that they can deliver, if not prevent it. The scale of acute food insecurity, including starvation, is intolerable. Over 100 humanitarian organizations are sounding the alarm as mass starvation spreads across Gaza, and their colleagues and those they serve are wasting away. Civilians are not starving. They are being starved by Israel as a weapon of war. We will closely follow the implementation of the EU-Israel deal. We remain cautious as there is no real change on the ground yet. Only significant improvement of humanitarian situation will be the proof of Israel's commitment. Palestinian civilians continue to be killed while waiting for water and aid or seeking shelter, even in schools and religious sites. We resolutely condemn the attack on the Holy Family Church. UN and humanitarian workers continue to work in an unacceptably perilous security environment and under intolerable operational challenges. They continue to be killed with impunity. We hear about investigations of incidents, but we never learn about their results. We condemn the latest attack on WHO facilities and staff and call for release of detained staff members. We are appalled by the continuation of the mass displacement orders. Mr. President, it started with attacks on UNRWA, continued on Secretary General, and now spreading to USG Fletcher and OCHA. What we heard today from Israel is a determination to prevent the UN and its humanitarian arm to help starving civilians in occupied territories. Because, as my colleague from Algeria said, they tell the truth. because of humanity that they serve and they represent. What I hope Israel heard today from Council members and will hear from great majority of UN member states later on is our determination not to allow dismantlement of the system we jointly built after tragedies of the Second World Wars, and which is representing a face of humanity to millions of civilians across the world. Secondly, we must not let Gaza overshadow the situation in the West Bank. There are unprecedented accounts of killings, demolitions, destruction, displacement, restrictions. Slovenia strongly opposes the revival of the E1 settlement plan and calls on Israel to cease activities that directly contradict the ICJ advisory opinion. Additional restrictions are being considered on UNRWA, an agency critical to the stability of all its areas of operation, also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Maximum pressure is being exerted on the Palestinian Authority. In response to these acts and violations, Slovenia last week adopted further bilateral measures. Thirdly, despite some reasons for optimism, the regional situation remains fragile and the future uncertain. The resumption of Houthis attacks in the Red Sea have potentially dire security, humanitarian, environmental, and commercial consequences in Yemen and beyond. We reiterate our concern over the escalation of violence in Syria and renew our call for the protection of civilians and a full cessation of all violence across the country. We call on Israel to cease its attacks on Syria and adhere to the 1974 disengagement agreement. We welcome the progress seen in Lebanon in the recent months. While challenges persist, the country needs continued support from the international community, including through the renewal of UNIFIL mandate. We underline the need to ensure safety and security and respect the freedom of movement of peacekeepers. Mr. President, a region marked by instability and conflict needs reasons for optimism. It needs the status quo of past decades to be broken. As stressed so many times before, it needs the international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights law to be fully respected. We welcome the reconvening of the Conference on Two-State Solution next week and reiterate our full support. We call for clear actions and clear commitments. Only through a two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, accept to live side by side, can the long-lasting peace in the region become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Secreto, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. You have the floor.
Dear Minister, my dear friend, dear Mohammed, first of all, I'd like to express the gratitude on behalf of our government to the government of Pakistan and to you yourself to utilize your presidency in this council to urge all to refocus all the efforts on peaceful settlements of all the disputes which have been going on all around the world. We appreciate it and wish you all the best with the remaining time of your presidency and your presence here in the Security Council. You know, I'm representing a Central European country, and those who live there, we know very well that the security of Central Europe is very closely linked to the security of the Middle East. Therefore, and this is maybe a selfish approach, but we are very much interested in peace, stability and security to return to the Middle East region. We wholeheartedly support the establishment of a ceasefire and a hostage deal in Israel for two reasons. First, such an agreement could give back a very fundamental human right to the people living in the region, namely a safe and secure life without the threat of daily bombardments and the daily rocket attacks. And on the other hand, such an agreement could make it possible that the Hungarian hostage could be released by Hamas finally. We urge for the release of all hostages immediately and unconditionally. And we do hope that all the efforts aiming at giving back the freedom to all the hostages will be successful. We all know that many attempts have been made in the recent decades to bring back stability and security to the Middle East. However, many of them were full of goodwill, but they were unsuccessful, with one exception. And this is the Abraham Accords initiated by President Trump during his previous mandate. The Abraham Accords have brought back the hope that nations and peoples in the Middle East can live together and next to each other in peace without terrorist attacks. And we do hope that circumstances will allow that President Trump can continue his efforts to make the Abraham Accords even more widespread. I can tell you, Muhammad, that personally I'm proud that I was the only foreign minister in the world who was present at the signing of the first Abraham Accords in the gardens of the White House. And here, when I sit here, I do not only speak on behalf of a Central European nation, but on behalf of a country which has a 1,000-year-long Christian statehood. And stemming from that fact, we feel responsibility and we do give our support to all Christian communities all over the world, especially if they are under attack or if they are persecuted. And unfortunately, in many places of the world that happens, including the Middle East, where the Hungarian government has financed 129 projects so far to help Christian communities to the extent of $70 million. We condemn in the strongest possible way the brutal massacres in Syria, aiming at the members of the Christian community, without any exception, kids, old people, women, men. This is totally unacceptable, and those terrorist brutal attacks must be investigated thoroughly. We also regret what happened to the Holy Family Church, and here I want to say that we welcome the consultations between Vatican and Israel, which have just taken place. And we do hope that all those negotiations which are aiming at a sustainable food and medical supplies for the Christian community in Gaza will be successful. We try to do ourselves instrumental, taking advantage of my friendly relations to Minister Sar. The Hungarian government has given financial assistance to the Catholic Church to carry out its humanitarian and social programs in Gaza in the most possible successful way. So when it comes to the peaceful resolution of the conflicts in the Middle East, when it comes to giving back the rights for all the people in the Middle East to live their lives without threat of daily bombardments and terrorist attacks, you can count on Hungary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Excellency, for giving statement on behalf of Hungary. Now I would give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Dara O'Brien, Minister for Climate, Energy and the Environment and Minister of Transport of Ireland. Excellency, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Pakistan for convening today's meeting, and I also thank ASG Chiari for his briefing. Ireland aligns itself, Mr. President, with the statement of the European Union. It is with profound regret that we meet again as this region continues to experience significant instability, with multiple crises playing out, many of which are interrelated and all of which threaten further escalation, further destruction, and further devastating loss of civilian life. I will first turn to the appalling and deteriorating situation in Gaza. Last week, this Council heard from USG Fletcher, who described a soaring humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where food is running out, and those who seek it risk being killed, where a shattered health system lacks adequate medical equipment and essential medicines, and where the critical civilian infrastructure such as water and sanitation systems are out of reach to those who so desperately need them. Since the beginning of the war, more than 56,000 people are reported killed and over 132,000 injured. We heard the stark illustration by the UNICEF Chief Executive Director Russell last week, who drove home these numbers with the chilling illustration that the equivalent of 28 children, or one entire classroom of children, have lost their lives in Gaza every single day over the past 21 months. Mr. President, we urgently need an end to hostilities. Ireland, in the strongest possible terms, once again condemns the terror attacks by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October 2023. Ireland, in the strongest possible term, also condemns the unconscionable taking of hostages by Hamas and has repeatedly called for their release. And I repeat that call again today. Ireland urges all parties to support efforts to reach agreement on a new ceasefire and hostage release deal. Humanitarian aid must be allowed into and throughout Gaza at scale. And Ireland calls on Israel, again in the strongest possible terms, to lift immediately the restrictions on the flow of aid and urgently enable the UN and humanitarian NGOs to do the life-saving work safely and effectively in line with humanitarian principles. The IPC Global Hunger Monitor in May reported that the entire population of Gaza is facing high levels of food insecurity, with 500,000 people facing starvation. 2 months have passed without adequate action. The humanitarian situation remains catastrophic. We continue to see mass casualty incidents at distribution centres which are run by private contractors under the new Israeli-approved model of aid delivery. It is horrifying that over 800 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid. We must be clear. Life-saving aid must never, ever be weaponized. Humanitarian principles must be followed. Hospitals must never be militarized or must never be targeted. Mr. President, Ireland remains extremely concerned about the situation in the West Bank, where Israeli military operations continue. We are seeing unprecedented levels of violence, large-scale displacement of the Palestinian population, and record levels of settlement construction, which is contrary to international law. The scale, speed, and severity of this displacement is unprecedented. We strongly oppose any steps toward territorial or demographic change in the occupied Palestinian territories. Ireland remains convinced that the implementation of the two-state solution is the only way to establish lasting peace and stability and security for both Israel and for Palestine and the wider region. We welcome the reconvening of the high-level conference on the two-state solution in New York next week, which will be co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We hope that the conference will be a decisive moment for the international community to express commitment to preserving the two-state solution. Mr. President, Ireland is deeply concerned about the situation in Syria and the disturbing intercommunal violence and killing of civilians in the southwest of the country. We urge all those involved to uphold the ceasefire. The safety and human rights of all Syrians must be upheld, irrespective of their faith or ethnicity. We continue to be concerned about the overall security situation in the region, and it is imperative that the Lebanese armed forces are supported to provide security across Lebanon, including in the south, and UNIFIL will continue to play an important role in this regard. Ireland welcomes reports that Iran will engage with the EU High Representative and the E3 on its nuclear programme, and it is our hope that a negotiated solution can be found to address the legitimate concerns of the international community. Iran can and should contribute to regional security by clearly ceasing its support for non-state armed militant groups in the region. Mr. President, it is clear that the military responses will not bring lasting solutions to any of the conflicts that afflict the region or achieve the peace and security that the peoples of the region crave and deserve. Ireland calls on the international community to come together to do all in its power to bring about a lasting and sustainable peace across the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency Mr. O'Brien, for your statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kazim Gharib Abadi, Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this timely open debate. Mr. President, we address this Council amid the ongoing collapse of the international legal order and the erosion of the United Nations Charter. Over the past 2 years, the world has witnessed, with growing outrage, the brutality of the Israeli regime against the people of Palestine. Tens of thousands killed or maimed, hospitals and schools bombed, UN staff and humanitarian workers murdered, millions displaced, and starvation weaponized against an entire population. These atrocities continue unabated and are intensifying daily. Today, the situation has grown even more catastrophic. The Israeli regime has devised a systematic method of killing, deliberately targeting starving civilians as they wait for life-saving aid. This is not just cruelty, it is premeditated mass murder. What is unfolding in Gaza is not a conflict between equals. It is the organized and systematic annihilation of a besieged civilian population by an occupying regime, supported and shielded by the United States of America. This is not merely a crisis, it is the defining humanitarian catastrophe of our time. The scale of suffering, the aggressor's impunity, and the paralysis of the international community expose a complete breakdown of accountability. Since October 2023, over 57,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been killed. Nearly 2 million have been forcibly displaced. Entire Gaza lies in ruins. Hospitals, UN shelters, schools, and essential infrastructure have been deliberately attacked. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war. Mr. President, Gaza remains a powerful symbol of unwavering resistance and a stark testament to enduring injustice. This truth is embodied in the extraordinary resilience of its people amid 22 months of relentless atrocities committed by the Israeli terrorist regime. Throughout this period, Israel and its criminal apparatus have employed every conceivable tool of repression, including the grotesque weaponization of thirst and hunger against a defenseless civilian population. Yet, as always, they have failed to break the iron veil of the Palestinian people. The intentional targeting of starving civilians, those lining up for bread, water, or humanitarian relief, is a flagrant war crime and a crime against humanity. The international community and Western states, especially the self-proclaimed champions of human rights in the West, cannot wash their hands of complicity. They must be held accountable for their silence, for their support, and for the blood of over 1,000 civilians massacred at so-called aid distribution centers, which have been turned into death traps by the US and Israel. Western states have also failed their obligations under Common Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions and the Genocide Convention. Their continuous support has enabled the atrocities and blocked this Council from fulfilling its mandate. Meanwhile, the situation in the occupied West Bank continues to deteriorate. Israel's expansion of illegal settlements, settler violence, and institutionalized apartheid policies violate Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention and Security Council Resolution 2334, and are part of a broader strategy of permanent occupation and ethnic cleansing. Mr. President, the threat posed by the Israeli regime goes far beyond Gaza and Palestine. As I detailed in my statement yesterday before this chamber, Israel, in full cooperation and complicity with the United States, has carried out a series of unprovoked and unlawful military attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran, targeting both nuclear and civilian and vital infrastructure. These attacks resulted in civilian casualties and struck facilities under IAEA safeguards. They constitute a clear and grave violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter and customary international law. Wider member states have widely condemned these acts of aggression as a grave threat to regional and international peace and security. At the same time, Israel continues to flagrantly violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic by occupying Syrian territory and pursuing illegal annexation and settlement expansion, openly defying the United Nations Charter and relevant Security Council resolutions. This regime also persists in violating the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, with near-daily breaches of Lebanese airspace, indiscriminate attacks, and the ongoing occupation of 5 border positions, all in direct violation of Resolution 1701. Moreover, the Israeli regime has carried out acts of aggression against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Yemen, targeting civilian infrastructure and further deepening the country's already dire humanitarian crisis. Mr. President, in light of these grave violations by the Israeli regime, which pose a clear and growing threat to regional and international peace and security, we call on the Council to take urgent and decisive action. First, demand an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and all occupied Palestinian territories. 2. Ensure unimpeded humanitarian access, the safe return of displaced persons, and the release of all arbitrarily detained Palestinians. 3. Reject all schemes of forced displacement, buffer zones, or third country resettlement. 4. Support full United Nations membership for the state of Palestine and reaffirm the Palestinian people's right to self-determination with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. 5. Enforce Israel's withdrawal from all occupied territories. 6. Condemn and hold Israel fully accountable for its acts of aggression and atrocities against the nations of the region, committed in flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and fundamental principles of international law. We also call on all countries, individually and collectively, to take whatever action they can to pressure the Israeli regime to stop its crimes. In this regard, I propose that each country set, declare, and follow through on a commitment to this end. Mr. President, the Security Council must not remain silent in the face of genocide and aggression. The protection of civilians and the maintenance of peace and legal and moral imperatives, not political options. Failure to act will not only betray the Palestinian people, it will permanently damage this Council's credibility and the future of the international legal order. Mr. President, today, the representative of the United States made a desperate attempt in this Council to distort reality and justify her country's act of aggression against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities, portraying it as legitimate and misrepresenting Iran's nuclear program as a threat to international peace and security. But the facts are clear and they speak for themselves. Yesterday in this Council, I elaborated on the root causes of the current situation. The United States attack on Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities was a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter, international law, Resolution 2231, and IAEA resolutions. It also dealt a serious blow to the global non-proliferation regime. Furthermore, the United States, alongside the Israeli regime, is currently the main source of instability and insecurity in the region and a major threat to international peace and security. The U.S. representative is therefore in no moral, political, or legal position to lecture or blame Iran. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency Mr. Kazim Gharib Awadi, for your statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Anisuzzaman Chaudhry, Special Assistant to Chief Advisor of Bangladesh. Mr. Anisuzzaman Chaudhry from Bangladesh.
Mr. President, we thank the Pakistan Presidency for convening this quarterly open debate. Bangladesh is deeply concerned at the escalation of violence and the immense suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza. Since the beginning of this mindless massacre, more than 58,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly women and children. Israel has been using forced starvation and displacement to continue ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people by design. Much of the territory now lies devastated with complete destruction of infrastructure to sustain life. We strongly condemn this genocidal killing and settler violence in the occupied West Bank, defying the repeated appeals by the international community. We also strongly oppose Israel's plan to drive the starved and thirsty Gazans to the so-called humanitarian city, who is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Ehud Olmert, condemned as nothing but a concentration camp. We also call for strengthening UNRWA to ensure unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The international community must implement the order of the ICJ to take all necessary measures to prevent genocide in Gaza. Mr. President, Bangladesh will continue its advocacy for establishing an independent, viable, and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We firmly believe that this is the only sustainable solution to the crisis in the Middle East. We also urge the Security Council to take immediate actions to recommend the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. Mr. President, we endorse the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution. We remain steadfast and unequivocal in our call on the global community to work towards a two-state solution of the Palestinian issue based on international law, ICJ's advisory opinion, United Nations resolutions, and the Palestinians' aspiration for peace, dignity, and justice. To this end, we condemn Israeli parliament's decision to oppose the creation of an independent state of Palestine. We also welcome the convening of the high-level international conference next week under the co-chairmanship of Saudi Arabia and France, aiming to accelerate the process of implementing the two-state solution. Mr. President, Bangladesh strongly believes that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state is inviolable. We reiterate our condemnation of the recent unprovoked bombings in Syria, Iran, and Lebanon. Israel must also end its illegal occupation in Syria and Lebanon. Bangladesh reiterates its long-standing position in favor of peaceful resolution of conflicts through dialogue and diplomacy. In conclusion, Mr. President, Bangladesh calls upon the United Nations and the international community to engage proactively in efforts to de-escalate the tension and promote peace and stability in the Middle East. We once again, in this Council, urge all to stop all forms of armed hostilities and violent repressions against the Palestinian people and the other nations. Otherwise, the future generation will never forgive us. Let us reaffirm our commitment to peace and say never again to violence, war, and genocide. I thank you all.
Thank you, Excellency Mr. Chaudhary, for the statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting stands suspended.